Welcome to our podcast. This is Friends on Fire.
I'm Mike. I'm a lifelong devotee of financial independence. I even wrote a book about it.
And I'm Maggie, a newer convert, but just as passionate, especially on the intersection of minimalism and financial independence.
We're one and the same.
We are two like-minded friends who believe that talking about money with your friends and family opens the door to financial well-being.
The Friends on Fire podcast is about dispelling myths, building financial acumen, and sharing your financial independence journey with the people you care about.
This is Friends on Fire.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Maggie.
How's it going?
I'm doing well, and I am feeding off of your energy right now because you have a huge grin on your face.
I have some magnificent news to share with people today.
Magnificent news?
I like it. I have some magnificent news to share with people today.
All right, let's hear it.
I mean, I don't know if anyone else is going to care about this as much as I do. But I think you care about it a lot also. Like, as a good friend, you're happy for me. But this is big, Mike. I don't like, how much do we tease it before I just say it? I mean,
let's just hear it.
It's in the show title, so there's no reason to tease it. So I have formally resigned at my company and set a last day. I've given a lot of notice. So my last day is in early May, and I will be formally retiring early at the ripe old age of 41 years young.
Whoop, whoop. Fireworks. I'll add those in this time. You're worth it.
I'll have nothing all day to do but practice my sound effects for the podcast, Mike.
Maggie, this is tremendous news.
Is this magnificent or
it's magnificent news.
Tremendous?
And you made some crack that people might not be interested, but we do host a podcast about financial independence and retiring early. And now one of the two co-hosts are retiring early. This is This is why we are doing this.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Did you think I would do this before you?
At what point?
When you first met, early on when we first started talking about our shared goals in this area. Did you think there was any way I would take the plunge before you?
Oh, that's a good question.
I just came up with that on the spot.
Oh, no, I love this. Let me think about it.
Remember we wrote something on my whiteboard? Mm-hmm. I think you wrote it on my whiteboard.
Yeah.
It was a location and a date.
Yeah.
To celebrate early retirement.
And you beat it.
I beat it.
I also remember putting a whole bunch of pictures of the two of us in your office.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
And then people walk by and they were like, this is weird. Why does Maggie have pictures of some guy she worked with?
You should clarify, you replaced all of the frames in my office that had like pictures of me and my husband and my family with pictures from our first Friends on Fire photo shoot.
Oh, that was
so every
great.
Frame in my office had a picture of us, a professional photo of the two of us in like our Friends on Fire t-shirts. My admin at first saw it and I think was like confused about everything.
Yeah.
But it was funny. I thought it was funny.
Thank you. All right. So to answer your question, I believe that you could and you should retire before me. However, at times in the past 3 years since we've known each other, I think you went back and forth a lot as you've tried to like figure out what you wanted in life. And so I think I got signals from you periodically that you might not, but now you are.
It's funny you say that because my husband and I talk about this all the time. My mind would change daily on this topic. I'd wake up one day and was like, this is great. I could do this I should be thankful for this. Like I should be, right? But I like this company. I like this job and I do. And the next day I'd be like, life is short. I gotta pull the plug, and I would waffle like daily on it. So when you say I would, sometimes go back and forth, like sometimes it was, multiple times per day that I would go back and forth in my own head, often verbalized to Greg, where eventually he was like, just pick a date out in the future and not debate this every single day. So, but this is big. Yeah. I say that the reason I even asked you that question is because when we first met, I would have assumed that you would take this plunge before me. Mm-hmm. Just because you were a little more resolute in your plans and your, not even exact plans, but just resolute in your conviction to retire early. I always knew I could. I just didn't know if I ever would.
Yeah. So this episode is going to be all about you, Maggie. I mean, it's not you talking the majority of the episodes, not really any different from any of
I was going to say
episodes.
some of the episodes that aren't supposed to be all about me, I'd probably talk
all
too
about
much
you. So let's start with, why are you quitting? And maybe I will try to figure out some way to add something to this episode. And maybe I will share some of my reflections about you over the course of our time together as you've come to this decision.
Yeah, you should. I would love to hear them. And you've been a huge part of this. I tell you, I got to be careful not to like build up your ego too much, but I frequently thank you because you've been a huge influence in my life in a positive way in this category. And I'm not sure if I had met you, if my trajectory would be what it has been over the past few years, financially and emotionally, to get to this decision. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And I think Greg would say the same. Begrudgingly, when it started about his cell phone and you critiquing why his cell phone bill is so high, he's come a long way in appreciating the role that you have in his life. Mike.
Yeah. Now, before we get into, let me back up one step. Before we get into why you are quitting, it's also very important to note that Greg is also quitting on the same day.
It's funny. I kind of like don't love the word quitting because I feel like it sounds like we're like quitting something. We are both early retiring on the same day, the exact same day in early May. I'm gonna keep that day a little bit of a surprise, but it's in early May. And yes, we made a decision to. It's hard to even get into like, you know, kind of all the back and forth that ended up getting us to this point. But ultimately we did, it was my idea to say like, hey, let's do it on the same day. It'd be kind of fun just to, you know, there's no point in being like 2 weeks apart just because we happen to pick different dates with our companies or whatever. So even when I was landing on the specific day with our company, I was saying, I was like, you know, technically this date's negotiable. If there's some reason it needs to be, you know, a week later or a week earlier. But I was like, for fun, this is scheduled around the fact that I've coordinated it with Greg. So yes, we're doing it together, which I do think is a big deal and like a big, you know, additional piece of context that changes the reality of this.
This is a huge component because a lot of times when people like us who have blogs or podcasts talk about retiring early, they in many cases have a spouse that continues to work. And that's still a great achievement. Going from dual income to single income, like very few people can do that. So I don't want to diminish the achievement of somebody leaving their job and retiring early when they have extra income from another spouse. But two spouses retiring at the same day, I mean, this is significant.
Same hour. We're going to log off at the same time that day too. Probably about noon, let's be clear. But no, you're right. It's funny. Greg, who I think, well, there's probably some like stereotypes as when a woman is, you know, having these conversations with people, even versus a man. But Greg just the other day was saying every time he has the discussion with people at work, which is a lot lately because it's kind of become more public for him recently, it's like two different discussions, and kind of the same thing happens with me. First, there's like a discussion about me. And then when I make the comment, or when, in his point was when he makes the comment that his wife is also doing it, it's a whole nother level of like reality and realization for people where they're like, oh, whoa, you're really like retiring together, right? Like you're not. And so I think you're right. There's a whole different lens than when it's just, you know, I think at first people probably hear him say it and think, oh, your wife's going to just bankroll that's fine. Like you're retiring, but you're just going to hang out while your wife still makes money. And it's like, no, actually we've prepared to like fully retire, which we'll get into what that really means. But okay, you asked me, I got to bring us back on track for once, Mike. You asked me why, right?
Why are you retiring, Maggie? So
I, for once in my life, have culled this down to 3 core reasons. So let's usually there's like 13 or 27 or something. So, and I like to think about this as like a 3-legged stool. I wouldn't have made this decision with just 2 of these legs, right? You need 3 to hold up this early retirement stool. Picture the early retirement stool in your head. I'm picturing a future social media image of a stool, by the way. Okay. So 3 big things. 1, I am just tired. I've been working incredibly hard in a formal, like corporate America type job for exactly 20 years now. I'm just burnt out and exhausted. And if I even think back to prior to my 20 years in corporate America, pretty high demand, me working like long hours, it's lessened as I've gotten older and had kids and had, other demands in my life. But for the first 10 years of my career, I worked a lot and more than I should have. I'm just tired. I'm burnt out. I'm exhausted. I quite frankly am at a point where I'm ready to enjoy more of the fruits of my labor and not keep running at the pace I've been running at. And my comment earlier is I even prior to those 20 years in corporate America, I worked my way through college. I worked my way through high school while playing sports and getting good grades and being very busy. I haven't stopped working since I was 14 years old. And I've just always been this like in a grind, right? So that's one reason. The second one is, tied to the first one. Like I'm having more and more of these like life is short moments and I want to finally carpe diem, or I'm carpe diemming if that's a verb. But I'm just, my kids are getting older by the minute. I have about less than 8 years left with my kids under my roof. And with one of them, only about 5 years, which is crazy to even, I feel like I can't count when I say, about 5 or 6 years. And so I've got like five to 8 years left with, all my kids in the house. And that time is going by and I want to be more present and engaged with them. And I want to be the type of person I know I can be, but that I am not always, because I give so much of myself to work and I have so little left for them. I'm better with my coworkers at times than I am with my kids. And that's sad. And that makes me sad. And that makes me have these life is short moments. And so I've spent 20 years giving the best of myself to everyone else and everyone at work. And I now want to start giving the best of myself to my kids and my family. Also, Greg and I as moms are both in their mid 70s and Greg's dad also. My dad passed away about 10 years ago. But we want to spend more time with our parents. We want to spend more time with each other. I want to spend more time with my brother and his wife who live nearby and are awesome. And we have amazing time together when we hang out, but we don't hang out often enough, especially considering we live a mile away from each other. And so, that's my big number 2 reason, in case you've lost count, Mike. Number 3, I can afford to. So I have prepared financially for this for a long time before I met you. And then I've supercharged prepared for it since I met you, Mike, which is why I say you've had a huge influence on this. And so we have gotten to the point where we have, quote, financial freedom. We've hit, a fat fire number. We have the flexibility to never work again at a reasonably low cost of living. And probably beyond that, right? Like we've pre-planned for college. We've pre-planned for, things we're going to need in the future. And look, a lot of unexpected things could happen. Well, we can do a whole episode on all of my fears. But back to number 2, life is short. And lately, I am more afraid of not doing this than doing this, which is a big shift in my mindset around this topic. And so ultimately, right, that's the 3-legged stool. I am financially and emotionally prepared for this. And that is why I am doing it. And I'll add one thing to this because, I can never not give more context. I also realize I haven't taken a breath in a while.
20 years, apparently.
Yeah, 20 years, 25 years, I think. So I'll also add, I am not running away from something, right? Like I actually like the company I work for. I like the job I have. In many ways, it's a dream job of a lot of things I've always wanted to do, like all wrapped up into one job. I'm running towards something, which I'm really excited about. And I just think that's an important kind of caveat on all of this also is that I'm excited to be running towards something that is important and bigger to me than any job could be.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is Magnificent, and I'm very proud of you. It's exciting that you finally made this decision and have put the wheels in motion.
Yeah, thanks.
Would you like to hear some of my reflections about my time knowing you?
Of course.
So I could tell from like the second I met you that you were burnt out on your number 1 point. And just the way that, you talked about the stress at work, the way that you reacted to things at work. And so I could tell right away that you were a candidate to do something different. And, we became friends talking about money, but I also saw in you that like you really needed, this was much harder on you than I think you maybe wanted to admit sometimes. And so
you mean work when you say this was much.
Yeah.
The demands of work.
And so one of the things that I remember like really trying to kind of talk to you about and change your mindset about was your number 3 point, your ability to afford it. So like you've been very frugal your whole life. You have earned a lot of money. And so when we met, you had a pretty high net worth. But I don't think you had ever thought about the structure of your net worth and the ability to go do something different. Not that you couldn't, you just never thought about it in such a way that made it tangible, that you could see your life not having a paycheck. And so the growth I've seen from you over the last 3 years is really thinking about how, like, where to put your money that grows it the fastest, how to make different investment decisions, but then also how to structure your income, your expenses, and make this like a real plan. And what I'd say, without getting into the personal details of your finances, is that this is not a jump and hope the parachute opens type situation, or jump and build the parachute on your way down. Like, you have a very specific plan. You have real numbers. You have pressure tested this stuff. Like, this is going to work because mathematically it works. And that's a lot of work on your end.
Yeah, that is a really, thank you, by the way. And that's a really great point, because you're right. When we met, I had a solid net worth. I was close to paying off my mortgage. I had been, pretty responsible with my money. Way more splurgy than I am now, just because I then had a more firm goal in mind. But I didn't quite know what that net worth could give me or get me. And to your point about kind of the structure and the specificity of the numbers, it was a really important and helpful exercise that was eye-opening in many ways, and that supercharged me doing even more over the last few years around like deferred compensation. And we'll talk about that more. But it made me do all these things, because prior to that, I might have just said like, oh, I'm burnout. I'm just going to take a leap and hope something catches me. I'm pretty good. I should be okay, but I don't really know, And even just the changes and the improvements I've made to my financial situation over the last few years since we started having these discussions, Mike, it has more firmed up the specificity that I am not jumping without a net, right? I know I not only do I know there's a net, I know exactly where all of the, pieces of the net are, where the holes are, where the, strong pieces of the net are. I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but I know exactly what that net looks like, right? And it's a good feeling. The
other thing that I'll add, just to provide some context about knowing you for the past 3 years. And this is an interesting conversation for me, because we can now talk about a lot of the things that led to this point that you and I have not shared on this podcast, but have been a part of our friendship. I think the other thing that you probably noticed that I think a lot of people miss is on your number 2 point about the time with your kids. Because from the day I met you, spending time with your family was the most important thing. And you valued those small moments with your children, doing ordinary activities. You valued traveling with them. Like, this was incredibly important to you, as it is for many people. But I think you were probably at the time in the mindset of, how do I maximize those moments within the structure of my life currently? So within my vacation days allotted to me at work, how do I maximize this time? How do I make it the most meaningful? And when you started getting into the financial preparation and the financial flexibility to make bigger life choices, you started seeing the possibilities about how much more time you could be spending with them. And it increased your motivation, because you saw that you didn't need a week-long vacation. You could do a 2-month-long vacation if you just put some things in motion.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
All right, so let's talk about how you quit, because I think everybody loves these stories.
Well, like many things in life, I built up a lot of, anxiety and stress about the moment itself, and how and who I was going to tell, and how and when. And all of a sudden, I can't remember if I told my boss or HR first. Do you remember?
That's a good question.
I might have told HR first. Anyways, I told somebody. But the point is, I just told them, right? Like it's like something I build up so much around. And then once you get the words out, you're like, oh, it's out. Right. And so I think there was no like crazy big existential moment, or it wasn't like on a bad day. Right. I didn't even schedule a separate meeting. I built it into like, previously scheduled updates. And the first 2 people I told were my boss, and then like our VP of HR, who I work very closely with as part of my day-to-day job anyways. And I just told him. There's, again, no fascinating, interesting story there, other than the fact that I gave a lot of notice, right? I've been at this company for 15 years. I didn't want to give 2 weeks notice, definitely. I also didn't even want to give a month's notice. I didn't want to give 2 months notice. I didn't want to catch anyone by surprise. I knew that there was very little downside to me telling people early. I mean, by the time I leave, I'd say I gave over 6 months notice, longer actually. And it's definitely unusual to give that much notice. And I could tell that even though there was a little bit of like everyone being happy for me and understanding like I'm not leaving to, go to a competitor or do something else, they almost didn't know how to handle that much notice. So it's interesting now, closer to the time that this episode is airing in February, it's close enough to me leaving now. But what is it? March? Yeah, I mean, it's less than 90 days from me leaving at this point when this episode's airing, that there's like starting to be more active discussions about the transition and everything else. But at the time, it was almost like I said it and then it was very uneventful because there was nothing to do then. Mm-hmm. It was more of just a point in time in the future. And the way everyone is in our business, everyone's busy. Nobody has time to deal with something 6 months out, right? They're dealing with like the crap that's, happening a week in front of them. So certainly had I given 2 weeks notice, it would have felt like a more big deal. But it was interesting because it was this huge thing to get off my chest. But then once I got it off my chest, it was sort of like, okay, well, we'll talk about that more down the line. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there were a few references to like, if you leave. And sometimes I would be like, you mean when? Because it's not an if, it is just the exact, I hadn't shared the exact date. I just said it would be before the summer. And so anyways, I just thought it was an interesting observation that people don't know how to deal with this much notice. And I've enjoyed having all the notice because it gives me time to properly get things in order and not feel rushed from like hiring to, who I can transition things to, even thinking about, how you restructure things, around somebody going, whether they're going to backfill me or not and all that kind of stuff. But it was, that's kind of the, quick version of how I quit and what happened and how it was received. There was no, I'll say there was no attempt to like keep me. And I don't mean that in a critical way, right? Like if I was going to a competitor, I'd be kind of offended. Not a competitor. If I was going to another company, I'd be a little bit offended if nobody tried to keep me because I'd be like, oh, I thought I was like valued here. But I think in, me stating why I'm leaving, there's absolutely nothing to argue with about it or to try to change, like nobody wants to change your mind on that topic and that reasoning. Which I also just thought was another interesting observation, and in a good way, right? Like I didn't want someone to sit there and try to change my mind. It's the last thing I need because I'm way more resolute now, but I was a little too not resolute. I was a little bit too like, this is already hard enough for me to take this plunge. If anyone tried to convince me otherwise, I might have been a little bit too susceptible to coercion. Mm-hmm. So I feel good about it.
So a couple thoughts on this. We've done a bunch of interviews on this podcast over the years, and we'd finish up with some inspiring story and we'd hang up, but you and I would still be on the line and you'd be like, I'm quitting my job. I'm going to do it. and then like you would.
Well, I would kind of tell them about my 1 more year syndrome and that I was like financially there, but just couldn't take the plunge, which was a big problem I've had.
Yeah. So seeing you kind of bounce back.
Mike, just to clarify, I misunderstood what you said.
Oh.
You're saying I'm so inspired by their whatever. But what's funny is I thought you meant like we would have private discussions with people after we were airing, and I often would be like, kind of say like, I was like, I'm financially there, but I still have this like 1 more year. I can't take the plunge, blah, blah, blah. And they were always like, just do it. Like, what are you talking? You're financially there. Why are you still working? So you're right. I would leave that conversation then being like, oh, I'm going to do it. Like all of those little like additional sort of interactions on my journey over the past couple years, especially with this podcast, have just given me a little bit of the extra like push that I needed. It was like, not one thing did it. It was like all of these things combined that were helping to push towards this.
We mentioned this a couple times already, but like you did bounce back and forth a bit between like being committed to quitting your job and thinking you should work a little bit longer. But every time you bounce back and forth, you were still moving in the general direction of eventually retiring early. And you were just building up confidence and addressing some of the concerns and fears that you had along the way. And so it's been kind of I want to say entertaining, but also, inspiring to watch you go through this, because I have in real time over 3 years seen you grow into the point where you're like, I am quitting my high-powered, high-paying corporate executive job.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I've also seen myself, because I am myself. I've been there for all those moments. But I have a terrible memory for specific, you probably actually remember them, ironically, better than I do. For me, all those moments sort of mesh together, and it just all sort of combines into something that's a loose journey I remember, but I don't remember a lot of the specifics. I remember some of the conversations and other things. For example, do you remember, I can't really remember what prompted it, but you at one point over a year ago, I want to say, pushed me to put a more clear plan on a page. And I remember I created that spreadsheet. Yeah. It was what you talk about in your book. It was kind of like an end of life spreadsheet. And one of my plans was that I will continue, if I could commit better to my proper part-time schedule and not working more than I'm supposed to be or paid to be, that I would stay longer. And then that I was going to switch to 3 days this year, which was going to be 2022. And if they wouldn't agree to do 3 days, then I would leave. I decided not to even do that. I jumped right past I decided more part-time was not going to actually give me what I need. So I went from, my 4 days to 0 days. But you pushing me to put that plan on paper even had me and then Greg as a result have a lot more clear discussions about this. So that is one specific moment I remember during my constant back and forth, which again is more constant than you even had a front row seat to. Poor Greg. Jeez. Poor me, because I have to think this stuff in my head, and then poor Greg, and then poor you in order of importance.
Yeah. Greg and I are the victims in all of this. All right. So tell me about your feelings now. Actually, as I ask you to tell me about that, I'm realizing we don't have another 60 minutes left on this show.
I love to talk about my feelings.
All right, let's talk about your feelings, Maggie.
Okay, I'm going to do this in a succinct way, right? Okay. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe not. Look, like we were just talking about, my feelings, even since I made the decision, they're more and more resolute as I get closer. But I oscillate on a daily, hourly, minute basis between a healthy mix of extreme excitement and extreme fear of oh my God, what the hell have I done? And what am I doing? This is is this the dumbest thing anyone's ever done? Right. Now, I will say, if I were to create some sort of a graph, a chart, a line chart over time or something, it's slowly the mix of fear is decreasing and the mix of excitement is increasing over the days, even though I kind of go back and forth, I'll backslide, I'll whatever. I just have more and more moments where I realize I am on the right path and I'm feeling good about this. And I'm trying to just, and Greg's been doing the same thing. I think Greg's been keeping kind of a mini journal about, the thoughts that come up just throughout these last 6 months or whatever. But I'm trying to observe and appreciate all of these last that might have otherwise stressed me out. And instead of stressing, I'm just thinking oh, wow, I'm not going to have to do this ever again, right? There's always a little bit of a stress at the end of the year. I'm trying to finish annual reviews before the holidays, and I always end up doing them over the holidays, or some other sort of stressful situation at work. And I'm you know what? This is one of the last times I'm ever going to, never say never, but probably one of the last times I'm going to be in this specific situation. And so I'm trying to just appreciate it, be observant of my feelings, recognize them, and, kind of move past and say, look, I've made a commitment. I've made a decision. I'm going to do what I need to do to move towards that decision. I made a brief comment earlier about how I've almost gotten to the point that I'm more scared of not doing this. I have all these feelings about what is responsible and what people should be doing. And who knows where they all come from. I'm sure all things my childhood, but I'm slowly realizing this is the responsible path for me, right? And I should have more fears about not doing this than about doing this, right? And it's cliche to say, but right, when you're on your deathbed, if found out in a year that I had 5 years to live, right? Like I wouldn't question this decision in any way, right? Because I would think like, oh, life's short. I'm going to spend time with my family. Why would I spend time working? And so I feel really good about it, right? And I'm slowly like back to the kind of shift of fear and excitement mixing or, increasing. And it was heavy fear in the beginning, and now it's, getting heavier towards the excitement. And I'm able to like slowly push down the fear every day. I just feel really good about it.
That's incredible.
Right. And I'm excited for the future.
I'm so happy for you, Maggie.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll also add, I have trouble relaxing. Like even when I'm supposed to be relaxing and it's, my Thursdays when I don't work, I just end up doing like projects around the house and being errand and I'm just constantly moving. Right. And so I do have, a healthy dose of skepticism on like how well I'm actually going to be able to relax and quote retirement. And if I'm just going to end up, volunteer, just filling up I do have a lot of goals around volunteering and other things, but if that, I don't want that to be at the detriment of all the reasons why I'm doing this. Right. Mm-hmm. And so we'll talk about that. We're actually going to do a series of episodes after this where we'll talk about how I'm spending my retirement, some of my goals in retirement for myself and my husband. And then we'll also do one on benefits, which I know people probably have a lot of questions about. It's a question we've received a lot, actually, when we've talked about early retirement. And then when we talk about benefits specifically too, we just get tons of, medical benefits. Yeah. We get a lot of questions on it. So we'll do a series of episodes, like continuing to talk about some more pieces about this. But that's how I feel in a nutshell.
That was reasonably succinct.
Yeah.
Thank you,
That was
Maggie.
a good nutshell size for me.
So Maggie, you talked about your feelings. What have you seen in other people's feelings when you have told them the news? Because there's quite a few people at work who know, and a lot of people in your personal life who know now.
Yeah.
How do they feel?
That's a good question. I get back to my point about like nobody trying to convince me to stay. I get a pretty consistent response of happiness and proud of me, more than I actually appreciated I would get. I mean, I don't know that I had thought a lot about how other people were going to respond. It wasn't my big priority. It wasn't a big, factor in my decision, but I didn't fully appreciate how happy everyone would be. Same thing with Greg. He's been getting calls from like everybody at his company. Just when they hear, like there was one time when it got out, it was like all weekend, he was like getting calls from people. And so I underappreciated how much the first response was just, wow, this is super cool. And I'm happy for you. Some of it turns into like, how are you affording this? Which we'll cover on a future episode. Of just kind of like what our plan is for how we're funding our early retirement. Though hint, hint, DCP is a huge portion of it. So big fan of deferred compensation plans. But that's the big one. Look, when I'm telling people at my company, it's mixed in with a bit of like sadness of like, oh, we're going to miss you. Like we like you, which look, they could be being polite. I don't know. I think it's mostly sincere. But so it's mixed in with like, but it honestly leads with, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I'm so happy for you, which it shouldn't be a surprise, but was a little bit of just again, I hadn't thought about it and is a nice affirmation from other people of my own personal decision.
Yeah, that's great. I do think there is a little bit of a disconnect with people when they listen to our podcast or they talk to us about this stuff and them realizing that it's not a gimmick.
Yeah.
It's not like just about frugality or being cheap or something. Like this is real. We're really doing this stuff. And now they're seeing what happens when it's put into action.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the other thing I would say is there is sometimes a little, I thought you were actually about to say this, Mike. There's sometimes a little bit of like confusion over exactly what they think we're just kind of taking some time off for a little while and then we'll come back to work or something. And so there is a little bit of confusion over like the reality of it and the financial aspects of it. And so I feel like Greg more so has gotten some questions. I've gotten a couple around like, well, how is this even possible? Right. And luckily I can point to like 130 podcast episodes where we've, discussed many other people's stories and just the math of it and everything else. But yeah, there's a little bit of, questioning of fully understanding how this works. But most of it, and from what my experience has been a curiosity and oh, that sounds so cool. You're doing that. How could I do that? Right. And not a like questioning oh, why are you doing this? This seems like a dumb thing. Like, how irresponsible are you? And, stuff like that. And then medical benefits. I will say I've had a few people directly bring that up, which again is why we'll do a detailed episode on specifically. I got a lot to say about what our medical approach is going to be and what I have learned through the process, because real quick plug for that, back to the taking a jump, like jumping and hoping the net will be there. I kind of did that on benefits. Like I knew generally what the approach was going to be and like what the worst case scenario was. And then I got into the specifics of it, which I'm kind of still in right now. And I'm like, oh, I didn't fully know that or appreciate that. It's fine. It doesn't change my decision in any way, but it's kind of funny of like, I knew enough there to be dangerous. And I've learned a lot more since I actually resigned. I was like, oh, I probably should have looked at this in advance, but.
Would it have changed your mind?
No, not at all. Because
Okay,
it's a finessing of what I already thought and some things where I'm like, oh, okay, I might have to switch doctors, right? Some little things like that, but I'll still have good insurance and I just may not be able to, go see a specific doctor. Or if I do, there'll be a little bit of a premium on it.
Yeah. And since you've already set the precedent of sharing with the audience your very specific medical conditions, are you going to keep people updated as you're going through your new plan after you leave?
Yeah, sure. I'll let you know how it goes when I switch OBs. We'll see.
All right, Maggie. Well, I think I speak for everybody listening when I say that I'm very excited for you. This is thrilling news, magnificent news. And I look forward to our future episodes where we dig into more about you making this big change in your life.
Thanks, Mike. I am really excited. And Greg's not here, but if he were here, he would tell you he's really excited also.
All right. Let's do top 3 takeaways. And let me I think number 1 key takeaway, Maggie's retiring, age 41. Congratulations. Second key takeaway, Greg is retiring, age 43. And third takeaway, I guess, this is awesome.
Yay! Fireworks. I'm excited for the future.
Yep, me too. All right, thanks everybody for listening. If you've been challenged or inspired by what you've heard, please rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode.
Also on the rate and review the show, what Maggie wants for her magnificent early retirement thing is for you to leave us a review. Like a written review really helps us. We would love it. It's what I would like for my retirement present from each of you. And if you have any thoughts or questions, we would love to hear from you. You can leave us a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370, or you can hit us up on Instagram.
All right. Thanks, Maggie.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Bye.
Bye.